To the Black Podcast. I'm excited, of course, because it's Thursday and we always have some great guests on here. It just seems like every week it's just getting, I don't know, I know it's broken English, but if I say mo better and mo better, but I am one of your co hosts, Dr. Sherelle Hobson, and I have had the pleasure of working with Mr. Street here. And we have been on the Black Podcast, having this Black Podcast for over a year now. But there is a bigger picture about the Black Podcast. But we first need you to do your job and make sure that you share the content and share on your social media. You never know who you need to share this story with. Sometimes we believe that it's not for us, but you never know who's in your circle that may need to hear the stories from our guests. So please make sure you're doing your part right now before we even get started with our guests, that you are sharing this content.
Yes, indeed. And I'm Brian Street. I'm the second half of this dynamic duo. Um, and I'm glad I was able to connect with Doc Hobson, which she wasn't Dr. Hobson at the time, but she's been able to excel, take her greatness to another level, and just link arms to be able to build what we're currently building. Started the Black Podcast, like she mentioned, over a year ago, and we knew that was just part of the overall vision. And we eventually got our company established, Hobson and Street Business Associates, so HSBA, where our flagship product, our flagship service is centered around delivering mentoring and leadership development training to juniors in high school, all the way through college, grad school, even after they graduate, connecting them with the proper network to make sure that excellence is united and that transition to the next stage of life is something that we're not allowing individuals to fall through those cracks. So we're very eager to introduce our guest today because he's part of our mission. I mean, just the pure fact of what he does, the capacity that he serves in, the types of students that he pours into, it really is in alignment with what it is that we're doing. And that's why he is before us today. And I want to hear more about his story. I want to hear more about his mission. I want to hear more about the lives that he's impacting. So I'm going to go ahead and unveil our guest for the day, Dr. Aaron J. Griffen. How's it going?
It's going great. It's a Thursday, and we're all ready for Friday.
Yes, sir.
Exactly. Anytime you're working for kids, you're like, okay, I'm ready for the week to be over. Uh, but we appreciate you taking the time to being on the Black Podcast. I know that you're extremely busy and you're doing, you someone special. You got books and all kind of stuff coming out. So I said the fact that he stopped and just spent some time with us on the Black Podcast, we know that we're important now that you've been on here. And so we
Very
thank
much.
you for accepting the invite and being our guest. We want to make sure that we maximize all our time with you. And so I like to begin, and I always tell people behind every glory is a story. So we can look at all the beautiful things and great things you're doing in your life and say, wow, he has lived his best life, his entire life. But we don't always know people's stories based off a 30-second picture, right? So I want to make sure that our guests know more about who you are. So if you can just tell us where you're from and the dynamics of your family, how you grew up.
Absolutely. So, well, I would say born and raised, but I wasn't born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was actually born in Cheverly, Maryland, PG, Prince George's County, at around, I'm going to say about 18 months or so. I was about 18 months. We moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then from there, when I was around 5, if I can remember correctly, when I was around 5, we actually moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. My mom has passed. My dad passed. My little brother's dad passed away. So I have no idea why we moved from Prince George's County to Pittsburgh to a small coastal vacation spot called Corpus Christi at the bottom of South, at the top of South Texas, about 2.5 hours from San Antonio. But I grew up in Corpus Christi, Texas, raised on the north side of Corpus Christi. And anyone who's familiar with Corpus Christi, shout out to all the folks I grew up with and those that helped my mom raise me. I grew up on the north side, lived in the projects, DN Leathers projects, lived in Hillcrest, We call it Hillcrest, Texas. And I attended Solomon M. Coles Elementary. If anyone knows the name Solomon M. Coles, that was a former slave who became a minister. So my elementary was actually named after him. And then I went to Driscoll Middle School, and then on to Roy Miller High School, where I lettered in football, basketball, and yes, soccer. Back in the early 80s, early 90s, soccer didn't seem to be very popular in our area with African American boys and girls, but some of us did play, and that's how I got my lettering jacket. I got my lettering jacket through soccer, and then I got on the varsity football and basketball team before going to Prairie View A&M University, a historically black college and university, 45 miles northwest of Houston, where I majored in English after. Okay, let me tell the truth. I majored in civil
Tell the whole
engineering.
truth.
Somebody's going to say that's not true. I majored in civil engineering, then switched to architecture, then switched back to civil engineering. And my third year Prairie View, not my junior year, my third year, let's be clear about that, I decided this is too hard, this is too boring. And I switched over and majored in English. And in my first semester, I got 6 Fs. I decided I was going through too much stuff with my mom. My mom was going through multiple surgeries on her hips and knees. Again, where I grew up in Corpus Christi, high poverty, high drugs, gang, a lot of violence going on, single mom, single parent home. So I was going through a lot of stress at Prairie View that third year, and I almost didn't make it. I stopped going to class. And luckily, because I went to an HBCUs tend to do a little bit more for their students, to my understanding. And they actually didn't kick me out. They put me on academic probation, and I was allowed to go to summer school where I had to get a 3.0. And I was able to get that 3.0 and continue going to school to Prairie View. And then the next semester, you look up and now I'm at a 3.8 because something just clicked. Something just clicked, and I started reading the literature, the American lit, because I'm at HBCU. A lot of it was culturally responsive and relevant. So I'm reading the literature, I'm reading the Harlem Renaissance and all these things, and it's like the world just opened up. And then I'm a huge hip hop fan, so I was into Tupac and Scarface and Biggie. So putting those things together really opened things up for me. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna be a teacher because I get to talk and I just get to be around kids like me. So I graduated in 1997, went back and got my second degree in history. So I have an English and history degree. And I decided that I wanted to work in school districts that were similar to the one I grew up in Corpus Christi. And I wanted to work in schools that were like mine in Solomon, Driscoll, and Miller High School. And that's what I've done my whole career. So I was an English teacher for 7 years in Aldine ISD, and then I was at Grantham Academy for Engineering, and then I was an assistant principal at the same school before starting my doctorate in 2010 at Texas A&M University in curriculum instruction with an emphasis in urban ed, because that was very deliberate and intentional. And I was recruited out of Texas to move to Colorado Springs, where I became a high school principal for 4 years in a school that was just like my high school. So I've always worked in schools that were very similar to where I grew up. And when people ask me, well, why do you choose those schools specifically? I said, why would I go to a place where I don't understand the culture? I said, I can relate to these kids very easily. I can relate to Hispanic students, poor white students, African-American students, LGBTQIA students. It's something about being in a high poverty environment that I grew up in and going into that situation and being able to actually understand and appreciate and value what people are going through and how children are showing up. Because a lot of people think that children leave their culture behind them in the neighborhood. When we show up to school, we show up with everything. We show up with the lights off. We show up with no food. We show up with roaches. We show up with all of it. But what y'all see is me acting out and being silly and cracking jokes because I was the class clown. I remember my Algebra 2 teacher was looking at me like, would you sit down somewhere? Because I'm cracking jokes to keep from thinking about what I'm about to go home to. So, going to Colorado Springs and being the principal of a high school for 4 years, I ultimately made the determination along with my wife that we were going to move to a larger metro area, which was Denver, where I would have the opportunity to be the founding director of diversity, equity, inclusion. And what that did for me was it allows me to expand my sphere of influence across 6,000 to 7,000 students. And also because of my consulting work, I'm also able to work with staff and students and other networks as well. So my whole career, I can honestly say, has been a trajectory from when I was born in PG, Prince George's County, Maryland, going to Pittsburgh, going to Corpus Christi, and all those experiences are in me. Like people they always say, forget. And then they say, but don't forget this. Don't forget 9/11, but forget this. No, we don't forget our trauma. We don't forget the things that built the foundation for what we do. So that's where I'm at now. And that's why I do the work that I do. You mentioned a couple of my books. A lot of my books are around P12 practitioner scholarship and hearing the voices of Black principals and things like that, because I'm always a person who wants to elevate the voices of those who've been silenced.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And you know, we have similar stories, when it comes to just where your heart is at. I've, done 16 years in public education on all different levels. And I've worked at the schools where the kids look like me, and I worked at the schools where the kids don't look like me. They both you give you the same kind of headache, but
Yeah,
the reward is different. When you can see that these kids really need you. And it's so much, you see within our community, a lot of times we talk about these challenges that keep reoccurring back to back to back and over and over and over. But you have a lot of people that came from places like yourself where they go on to do big things. They go get a doctorate and they go work, somewhere else. And it's like, yes, it's nice to see, and it inspires our community and our youth, but does it really help them?
yeah,
They need somebody that they can touch and feel and see for their own selves that, hey, I can see myself in this person because they're right here.
yeah.
That's what makes the difference. And that's why we decided to create the Black Podcast, to bring people like you in front to say, this is my story and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. You have a doctorate just like me, and we can go work at 1,000 other places. But if you want to get back into your community, you may not make as much money as all the other places, but the
Yeah.
reward is so priceless on what we do for our community. So I really thank you for being a voice for them. Now, if you can just kind of elaborate on, you talk about HBCUs, and prior to you going to a HBCU, did you know, like while you was in high school, like I'm going to go to a HBCU? Did you know that that was where your heart was at? Or was it like, because a lot of times our students go to HBCUs because they're not accepted at the other universities,
Yeah.
or they don't look at HBCUs like they don't give as much respect to HBCUs as they should. They're doing it more now, so because people are talking about it more. But for a while, I know even growing up, we only knew about the Big 12 schools and those big colleges. You never really heard people talking about HBCUs. So when did that become an interest for you, that you said, okay, I want to go to Prairie View?
So what happened is, growing up, I didn't watch a lot of football, but I played high school football. So, when we play high school football, a lot of us hope to go play in college and maybe the NFL. That's just our dream. But I remember the first HBCU I really knew about was Grambling, because every now and then they pop up on ESPN. We'd see a field goal here and there. So I knew about Eddie Robinson, and I knew about Grambling also because of Doug Williams, 1987 Super Bowl MVP. Make sure we don't ever forget that. And I even had a football, and I wrote his name on it and everything, because I grew up a Washington Redskins fan. I've been a Redskins fan since '83 when they lost to the Oakland Raiders. And what's that guy's name? Marcus Allen, that did that little reverse run on him and stuff. So when people say I'm a bandwagoner, no, I've been with the Redskins, which is now the Washington football team, since 1983, and the Lakers, and have never stopped. So that's my team. So I knew about Grambling before Doug Williams, but then I also knew about him because of Doug Williams. And then I learned later that Walter Payton had come out of Jackson State and Jerry Rice had came out of Mississippi Valley State. And of course, we all knew about Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, and Xavier, the private institutions. And I also knew about Florida A&M because of Nate Newton, who played for the Cowboys, who I absolutely despise, just so y'all know. NFC East, that's my problem. But I knew that Nate
Another
Newton,
show. Mhm.
yeah, I knew that Nate Newton went to Florida A&M University. So what happened is I knew about Black colleges. See, we didn't call them historically Black colleges and university. They were just called Black colleges back when I was in high school and middle school. And what happened is I started learning that some of my teachers at my high school, Miss Barnett, God bless her soul, she went to Prairie View. And then I learned that one of my childhood friends' grandmother went to Prairie View. Back when Prairie View was just a teaching and military school. Back then, way back in the like 30s and not 30s, but maybe 40s and 50s. So I learned that she had went to Prairie View. So I started learning about Prairie View. And then a couple of my classmates who were older than me went to Prairie View. So that's how I learned about Prairie View. So as I started thinking about college, and to be fully transparent, and I don't care whose feelings I hurt, um, here I am in high school. I'm ranked in the top 10% of the class, maybe top 25 here and there, depending on what I'm doing in my grades. And I never considered going to college until my senior year, when I went to my counselor and she said, "What college are you thinking about going to?" And I looked at her like she was out of her mind. I said, "What? Like, what college you think about going to?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, you're college material." I'm like, "What is it?" I said, "Am I?" Because in my brain, only rich white children went to college.
Right.
The only
We
example
went to
I
go
had
get jobs.
Yes, the only
Mhm.
example I had of college was the Cosby Show in A Different World. And I did say that if I ever went to college, I want to be Cliff Huxtable and Claire Huxtable. I said, that's what I want. So when she said that, she set me up to take the ACT and the SAT in February. So anyone who's listening to this knows how late that is. And that's my senior year. So without any studying and all that stuff, because I couldn't afford it, and back then we had to pay it out of pocket, so I could only take them one time. And thankfully, I had a little summer job, so I had a little money. So I took the ACT and got a 21. I took the SAT, and if I'm not mistaken, it was a 920 or a 940. And people were like, "Oh my God, that's great." I'm like, I don't know this. So I started applying to schools, and I applied to University of Texas. I was accepted. University of Texas, San Antonio. I was accepted. Texas A&I Kingsville, which is now Texas A&M Kingsville. I was accepted. So those were the three schools I was accepted to, and I had a couple of schools recruited me for basketball and football. There were non-scholarship conferences, and because I filled out the information wrong, I never got my financial aid stuff. So what happened is I'm like, okay, I can't go. I'm going to the Army. And I had already went and met with a recruiter. I took the ASVAB. My older brother, who retired Air Force, was like, "Wait a minute, what was your score?" He's like, "No, we're going to go to an Air Force recruiter." He said, "You have a high enough score to go to the Air Force." So he was going to take me to the Air Force. And one of my childhood friends, who everybody thought we were dating, but we weren't, told her mom, who happened to be the PTA president, that, "Hey, Aaron's going to the Army." And they were like, "Why is he doing that?" So they grabbed me along with some folks from the local churches, and they went and they said, "These are the schools you're accepted to. Are there any other schools you might consider?" And I was like, "Well, there's Prairie View." And they said, "Okay." We filled out the application. They got the church and people to donate money to me, and they put me on a Greyhound bus from Corpus Christi to Prairie View in July, while I was still working at the Naval Air Station in Corpus Christi. My counselor at Prairie View filled out my FAFSA and had me fill out scholarships. A few weeks later, I had my grant, and I got a full scholarship to Prairie View plus a partial engineering scholarship because I had a 21 on my ACT. So I was like, wait a minute, I can actually go to college? And I was accepted. So I told the Army recruiter, "I'm sorry, I'm going to Prairie View." And they were like, "How are you going to do that?" I got a full ride, and I went to Prairie View, and that's now. I'm gonna be honest. After the first year, I lost the scholarship because I had a great time.
I'm sure.
I had
I'm
a
sure.
great time. So after the first year, I didn't meet that 3.0, just so you know. But I was able to get some grants because high poverty student. And I was able to get partial scholarships here and there, either through engineering or some other way. But yeah, that's how I wound up getting to Prairie View, and I was homesick because coming from Corpus Christi, in our neighborhood is Black and Hispanic, a small population of white and Asian. You go to Prairie View, and everywhere you look in every classroom, there's a Black face of all shades and ethnicities and all countries and religions. And that right there was a shocker to me. And I told my mom, I said, that show we watch, A Different World? She said, yeah. I said, college is a different world. And I said, this is a college with only 5,000 students. So I can only imagine what it would have been like at University of Texas. where it's like, I forgot, 30, 40, 50,000 students. I'm like, I'm glad I went to a small college. I wouldn't have done well at the bigger college. I needed the smaller classrooms with only 25 to 30 kids in it. So for anyone that's listening, know your child. Know if your child would do well in a large environment or a small environment. For me, Prairie View was where I needed to go, or Texas A&I. I would not have done well at UT. Too many kids, too many people. I'm a person who like small circles. I needed that small environment where I knew that if I did go to class, because yes, I would skip class, and the professor would see me at lunch, he'd walk up and go, Professor Griffen, come here. I didn't see you in class today. Keep that up, and you'll see me next semester again. Real simple. They walk up in the cafeteria and they look and call you out in front of everybody. Call you out. And then let you know, I know you was at the party this weekend because I saw you. That's my rental house y'all was at. He said, but here you come walking up in here late to class, but you was at my rental party last night partying on a Sunday night. See, that kind of stuff.
Right.
That kind
Well, you
of
looking real crazy, like, okay,
stuff.
so
Yeah. So it benefited you. So that's how I wound up going into Prairie View. And that was God. That was God. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, was going to Prairie View A&M University, because I'm telling you, I got 3 degrees out of Prairie View: an English degree, a history degree, my master's degree, my principal certification out of Prairie View, and then I went to Texas A&M. And I'm telling you, everything I learned at Prairie View set me up for success at Texas A&M. A Tier 1, Research 1. What is it? Top number 14, a public number 1 in Texas right now, public institutions. And I'm telling you, when I walked into that doctoral program and they had us doing research, I'm like, this is not nothing new. I was writing 25 pages in undergrad. I was writing 35 pages in undergrad in English and history class. I was using microfiche to go find out in World War II what the editorial comments were to Black soldiers fighting in the military in World War II. And I had to go to microfiche and literally get firsthand accounts about what they were saying about Black soldiers. So when I went to A&M and we did the doctoral program, going to find articles from the 1700s and 1800s was nothing new. That's
yeah.
what we did in Prairie View all the time in the English and history departments.
Wow. My current leader right now is from Prairie View. He graduated from Prairie View. That's all he talk about. Tony Reynolds, you probably know him.
Yes, I know Tony.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's my boss, Tony Reynolds.
yes, yeah, I know Tony.
He is a PV. He talk about PV. You go in his office, all you see is PV. And then
Yes,
everybody
indeed.
else's office after that, it says PV. But like you talked about the importance of being a part of a community, where those instructors there at HBCUs know that they have to do the extra,
Yeah,
know where the whereabouts are, know who their students are. Like you said, if they didn't talk about, knowing where you were the night before and just kind of let you, which they do at a lot of the predominantly white schools. And we've talked about that, Brian and I, that was something we looked at the stats of why so many Black students drop out, when they go to those University of Texas and all those schools, because they get lost in the masses when there's
yep,
nobody there to keep them accountable. And people think, oh, because they're in college, you should be an adult now. But we have to follow our students the whole journey. We have to keep them accountable. Now, some of them you have to literally hold their hand, but others, you have to make sure that you're holding them accountable. And they
yep.
like,
Can I speak on that? Can I speak on that a little bit?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, I don't care whose feelings I hurt, because this is real, and they know it's real. So I read something a few years back and it has stuck with me. And they say one of the biggest mistakes that we make in the Black community is we put our kids out the house at 18. So when our kids are 18 and they want to get their own apartment, we just let it go. When they go off to college, we just assume that they're adults and we let it go. When I tell you other races don't do that, because we assume that we need to let go. No. When I tell you that there are children at the University of Texas and all these places that are getting their hands held throughout their college career. They get food, they get resources, they get all the prep courses, they get tutoring. When you are affluent, because let's be clear, I got a 10-year-old who, when he was in kindergarten, he was reading on a second grade level. It wasn't necessarily because he's gifted. Yeah, my son's gifted. All children are gifted. But mom and dad are language arts teachers. We have master's degrees, and dad is about to start a PhD. Mom now has her EDD. So, of course, my boys are well read and knowledgeable. But guess what? When I see struggle, you get a tutor. Oh, you having problems in math? You get a tutor. We're not doing Khan Academy. We can do that too, but I'm going to pay this $300 a month to make sure that you are above, at or above grade level. So when you get to ninth grade, you're in pre-AP algebra now. I mean, not pre-AP, you're in pre-AP this. You're what's he in? He's in pre-AP. He has biology honors, pre-AP this. He has like 3 pre-AP classes. Don't think that everybody else isn't doing that who have the resources to do it. I mean, we got people running this country, and we're all looking around like, what in the world? They got help to get where they're at.
Absolutely.
That's why they are critical thinkers. And I'm
Absolutely.
saying they because y'all know who I'm talking about. There's
Absolutely.
people in Congress, there's mayors, there's governors, there's people running businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're up there don't mean that. I mean, there's a reason why wealthy people were paying for their children to get into USC because they wouldn't have got in any other way.
Sure wouldn't.
So don't think that that's an anomaly. Well, they had to do that because of affirmative act. No, they weren't going to get into USC to begin with. So they paid their way in.
Right.
Legacies. Now you have universities going away from legacies. So just because my grandparents bought a building at Harvard, I get to go to Harvard.
Right.
What qualifies you for Harvard? Just
Right.
because of your
grandfather then.
So I wanted to name that because when your children go off to college, you got to walk with them.
Absolutely.
You got to hold their hands. I've already told my son, if you go to college in the city, you can stay home. Matter of fact, you can stay home all the way through your master's degree. You can be 25 living at home. Because I know a whole lot of people in my neighborhood whose 25-year-olds are sitting in their house stacking their money. And when they get their first house, they have a huge down payment and don't have as much debt as I had when I bought my first house.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So make sure we don't let our babies go like that when they go out to college.
Absolutely.
Man, I absolutely love so much of what you're sharing. And just from the top, when you started to speak about the process, Benita said, hold up, let me tell the whole truth. That's what we need to hear, because a lot of times we have young men and women that think that my situation ain't like yours. So you don't know my struggle. I chose this major. You don't know how difficult it was to say, Mom, I don't want to study this anymore. I don't want to study that anymore. You don't know how it was to go that first year and have fun and lose that scholarship. I'm telling you, it makes me think back to my process where I graduated high school, 3.89 GPA, got into college first year. It was my first time not being a student athlete. So I was student athlete all the way from 4 years old until I finished high school. I was a student athlete. To be just a student didn't make sense to me. Like, how can you just be a student? So I was in the rec center playing basketball all day, every day. I get out of class, I drop my book bag in my dorm, I get something real quick to eat. I literally spend the next 5 to 7 hours at the rec center. Come home, man, I'm too tired to do homework. I'm too tired. And I dropped down to a 1.76 GPA. Academics, academic probation. Mr. Street, you have this. We're gonna give you one more chance. After 2 years, and I'm talking about pushing through summer also, academic suspension gave me the boot. And to this day, actually till last year, my parents had no idea. They had no idea that I flunked out because I had a child on the way. My son, you saw his poofy hair come around the corner. But I had him on the way at the exact same time. So my story was I withdrew to take care of my responsibilities. So many people, they see where I am today, and until they
lived a lie your whole life.
Yeah, it's like it's like this guy. I can't be like him. I can't, run all these companies. I can't be a speaker. Like, I can't do all these things. Like, he's got a master's degree. He's got PhD studies. He got all these bachelor's degrees. Like, it was easy for him. He don't know my struggle. So we have to tell that whole truth because they don't realize how difficult it is. It's like they see the prize, but they don't see the work that it took to get to the prize. So you told that, and then you went back. You didn't even realize that there was a possibility of you even going to college until senior year.
Yep,
Now, we got kids today, like their parents are telling them while they're young, you're about going to college, you going to school, you going to college,
that's
and
me.
they fall short even when they had it. You know how they say knowledge is power. Well, if
Yep.
you don't implement it, if you don't apply it, like they had the knowledge, but they're still not applying. Far too many. So it's just so important for people to see that this is Dr. Aaron Griffin in front of you, but Dr. Aaron Griffin went through a few things.
Oh yeah, and
That's
you know,
so important
you just spoke on something that I want to throw out there.
for sure.
Let's talk about Carter G. Woodson's work, and for the children or the parents watching or whomever, the father of Black History Month. But Carter G. Woodson wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, and in that book, he talks explicitly about the Black PhD and the fact that we have people who get up in economics and education. We get our PhDs, and he called it resting your oars. We've been rowing our whole life, and then once we get to the place where we feel like we've made it, we rest. And when we rest, we fail to reach back, and we fail to your point, be transparent and open. And there are some of us, again, I don't care about feelings, who know who they are, who have gotten where they are, and they forget. They forgot. It's like when Allen Iverson was talking about Kobe Bryant and we're talking about the greatest of all time. And Allen Iverson says, he said, why is nobody talking about Kobe? What they forgot? Like they forgot. Like people forget. Like, yeah, you're where you are, but did you forget that that wasn't how you started? So then you meet people who are like you and you look down on them because you feel like that because I worked hard and made it, you should be able to work hard and made it. That's not real. That's not everybody's reality. And that's what's wrong in this country right now, is that people refuse to acknowledge people's perspectives, not perception. Perception is like based on reality. Perspective is my reality as it happened to me. So when I'm telling you that even though I go to college and I study as hard as I can, I'm still not successful, believe me, don't think I'm being lazy. Believe me, maybe college isn't for me. I didn't know that until I went to college. But I'm not going to sit here and tell anyone, and I know I'm trying to, I will never tell children that everyone is not meant for college because I've never heard that said in affluent circles. The only time I hear that said is when it's high poverty communities and Black and brown children. I have never heard the president or anyone else with affluent children say everybody's not meant to go to college. It's not interesting. They don't say that to their children, but you're gonna say it to my children. That's not gonna happen. But my point is that we have people who have rested their oars and they refuse to reach back and they refuse to acknowledge that we all struggled and that some of us have to struggle a little bit harder to get where we are. And that means that me, Aaron, I need to clear obstacles and barriers to people behind me. I don't need them to go what I went through to get where I get to. My two sons don't need the struggles I had. So yeah, they'll have a car in high school. Yeah, they'll have a car in college. Yeah, I will pay for their school all the way through their master's degree if I can. I'm not going to let them go take out student loans just because I struggle. Why would I do that? My nephews and nieces, if I can, I'm going to remove every obstacle that I've ever gone to. And we need to, and as a people, we need to remember that. We need to start removing obstacles and taking doors off hinges. Once you walk through the door, take the door off the hinge so it never shuts on anybody else. Like, stop doing that. We like, well, I worked hard, so they need to work hard. No, they don't, because every other culture does the same thing. I made it, I'm gonna make it easier for you. Why do we have to make people struggle just because we struggle? That makes absolutely no sense.
Right. Because their struggle was for us. We think about the people that have struggled, our history. It's like why wouldn't you go vote or why wouldn't you go do these things? It's somebody have already paid the price for us to have these rights and these opportunities. So why do we have to keep repeating a cycle? And that's what happens because in our community, especially right now with our young men, in particular, anything that seems too hard, they're not going to be interested in doing. And so right now the culture is money, and I've had
Uh,
so many conversations with um, black and brown, and I would say, so where are you going to go to college next year? You're a senior, and they're like, I'm making good money right now. I'm not going to college. Like, well, where do you work? I work at Walmart. It's like, that ain't no money. But when you're a 16-year-old boy and you get these $300-$400 checks, you think that you're making money, but you realize you're probably not paying no bills either right now. But
yeah,
that's what our culture has been. It's been about money, 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 money. And I mean, I believe that even if you want to be in the entrepreneur space, in order to be well respected, and because it's one of those things like, you may not be a college student or you think you're a college student, but why not? If it's there and it's available, why not use it? Why not take advantage of opportunities that are there? You can still go open up your own business and go do all those other things that you want to do, but your
yeah.
education is important because, I mean, for one, why wouldn't you go get it? So when you see that, I'm gonna talk about you being in your space as a leader. A lot of times we have leaders who look like us that they're so disconnected from what the reality is. And I've worked in places where um, I've always been challenged by my leaderships on my approaches with my students or my conversations with them, because I was constantly always challenging them, to think higher, think more, always become the person you've never seen, you
Yeah.
know, and um, when you're working in a system that doesn't support that, sometimes they look at it, not sometimes, they do look at it like, hey, stay in your lane, focus on the curriculum and stop talking about, whatever else you're talking about. When you are a leader and you being in this space and you knowing the importance of the system but also the truth, how do you balance those two? I mean, I know you're in a position right now where that you may not have to as much, but because if you're working in education, there still are so many guidelines that are out there for
Yeah.
us not to be successful. How do you find that balance, as a leader, to make sure that you follow the system but teach the truth or speak the truth? How do you find that balance?
Um, that's not a hard question, but I want to make sure I answer this in a way that resonates with as many people as possible. What I appreciate automatically is that you value and acknowledge that my situation may be very different than everyone else's. So I'm the vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I got promoted a year and a half ago. So I'm a vice president, and I'm in a network where the CEO is a white male. My former boss was a white woman, and both of them grew up affluent. I come into this network as the first director of diversity, equity, and inclusion after they've been doing the work for a little while. And the first thing I noticed was, okay, are they actually going to let me just, no, not let, are they actually going to accept and value everything about me? Because they did their research. They went on Google. They saw my curriculum vitae. They know what type of articles I publish. They know what kind of books I'm working on. They've seen my presentations. They already knew that when I come in here, if we're going to talk about white fragility, we're going to talk about white fragility. If we're going to talk about anti-racism, we're going to talk about anti-racism. When I get in front of the news camera, they trust that I'm not going to put us in a bad space, but I'm going to say what I need to say. So I'm able to balance that because, one, I work for an organization and a group of leaders who have been courageous enough to say, we're just going to trust this person, that black man, this person, to do what we've asked him to do, and we're going to trust him to tell us what needs to happen. So when I've been asked like, hey, do you feel like you're a token or that you're tokenized? And I said no, but I do allow me to be token sometimes. And they're like, what do you mean? There are times where we're in a situation and the only person who can resolve that is me because I have a shared experience, because I know where they're coming from. Let me talk to that parent or that teacher or that leader or that student while I'm in the school. Let me talk to them because I'm looking at how they're looking at all of you. Let me talk. Sometimes I do tokenize myself. Why is that a problem? We're trying to resolve an issue, but I have enough trust to know that I can step in and I can step out. That's how I balance it here. How I balanced it as a principal was I had to work within the parameters, but that's the key. Work within the parameters and bring stuff in. We have a tendency that when we want to tell the truth, we want to disrupt this. We want to tear down everything that we see as untruth. That's fine. But understand that it's an untruth that other people find truthful because of their perspective. Case in point, a few years back, I had a teacher reach out to me and say, "Hey, I have a an 11-year-old white girl who is reading The House on Mango Street and does not believe that Hispanic people have been marginalized and minoritized. That's a problem." And I said, "Why?" Because that's not true. I said, to that 11-year-old white girl, that's true. How was that? Her dad might have been laid off. And when he was laid off, they replaced him with immigrant workers. So in his perception, in her perspective, that's real. So you can't just go and say this is not true for that person. You have to actually work within that untruth. So the way I balanced it as a principal was this is wrong. Let me and the staff work this in, even as an assistant principal. And over time, you start to see the transition. Like people say, when I was an assistant principal, no, when I was a principal, one of the things we had that we really stopped doing is every time students had a verbal altercation, they were suspended because we knew the verbal altercation would lead to a fight. So we were trying to cut it off at the head, only increasing suspensions, but the fights weren't going down. So we made a decision, no more suspending for verbal altercations. They're going to go downstairs and we're going to do restorative justice and they're going to work it out and they're going to bring witnesses and they're going to have a conversation and they're going to agree to disagree and whatever they're going to do. You know what wound up happening? Other students started referring students who were having arguments. We had seniors walk up and say, "Dr. G, y'all need to take these two downstairs. They're down there cussing each other out, man. Y'all need to fix that mess." That's what wound up happening. So instead of changing the whole district policy, we inside our school started adding in our own interventions within it to where we didn't have to suspend. We didn't have to suspend for 3 days for fighting. We could put them in ISS, forget suspending, because they're going to still get their academics. So that's the balance of speaking that truth. You can speak the truth, but understand that untruth is true for some people. As bad and as hard as it is, there are people in this country who believe that when they stormed the Capitol, they were doing it to overthrow a dictatorship government. As horrible and bad as that was, we can't ignore the fact that these people actually believe they were doing the right thing.
Right.
We can't ignore that.
Right. Yeah. And we had a guest earlier on the show, Mr. Jetson, and I remember I said, we have a system that is broken. And he said, "Well, I have to disagree with you, Doc." He said, "The system isn't broken." And I said, I'm thinking like, we're on this show and you're telling me the system isn't broken, you know? But what he was saying was, it's not when you're telling other people that we're in a system that's broken, they're looking at you like, well, what's broken about it? We're successful. We've made it. We're doing great in it. It's y'all that's not doing great in it. So why is it broken? So um, we talk about a lot, especially with me and Mr. Street, when we decided to create HSBA. We knew that we can speak the truth or we can be the truth. And we
Mm,
knew we wanted to be change. And so we said, if we want change to happen, we have to be the change. So we have to implement or create something that is going to be different, that now we can, propose to places that we know need to change and say, hey, we have something new. This is what we're doing. Because if you're counting on people to see through your lens of change when their lens is they see normal, so when you're coming in and saying, we want to do something different, we want to change the narrative of young Black men. Why? It's working out fine. Why do you want
Yeah.
to change that? So when we're saying, well, hey, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to add, that way people are more open to buying into something maybe they're not familiar with than you saying, well, can you do it? Can you create the change? And so I really appreciate that you're saying, we talked about it all the time. We talk about policies. We know kids are always going to argue, but now when you can teach them how to disagree, to agree, to disagree, how you conversate through differences and stuff like that, that's just installing those skills that they're going to need for the rest of their lives. But
Yeah.
that the system is in place where you're getting in those altercations. It's like, okay, well, let's suspend them. And now what happens? They go home, they're not doing anything. Now they're
Yeah.
in more trouble because mom and dad are probably at work or not there during the day. So now they're out doing. So now something that could have been, you know, 2 days or one day or a 30-minute conversation on how to redirect your energy or your conversation, now it's turned into probably a lifelong issue if they get in more trouble. And that was a
Yeah.
part of the system, is how do we get these kids out of here? How do we continue to do that? So I think that was a great thing that you taught them, and other students can see that, hey, all you have to do is communicate. And that has been one of our biggest challenges in our community, is nobody talks. We're just taught to mind your own business. Don't tell people your business. Don't be careful about saying this and be careful about saying that. And we never get to really live our truth, whereas other people do. We're too busy living their truth and not ours. And so a lot of our young men and women are falling by the wayside because we're continuing to live theirs and not live ours. And I appreciate you having that balance and being in a situation where your counterparts, they trust you to go and say those things. I remember when I was going to apply for different jobs, people would say, well, be careful about the Black podcast because of the things that you talk about, or be careful. And it's like, well, that's my truth. So if somebody hire me based off of what's not my truth, I'm going to go back to feeling like I'm suffocating in my own life. And so you rather go to a place where people already know, hey, Dr. Griff's coming in. We know he's going to talk about this. We know he's passionate about that. So if that's not really what you want, then you don't hire people like that. So it's great that you're in a position to be that voice. And like you said, be it. Sometimes you have to be the token. If you have to be the voice to speak, life to those students or those parents or whatever, then you have to do what you have to do. So I appreciate you stepping up to that. Now, what are some of the other things or challenges that you feel? Have you ever came across a situation where um, you are speaking your truth, you're implementing what you know works based off of research experience, and you get a lot of pushback, as far as, we know that's not going to work, or hey, that's a real sensitive topic. How do you overcome those conversations or those challenges, to make sure that you still are implementing the things that you know are relevant?
Um, in my present role, and as long as I've been where I'm at in DSSC Public Schools, I haven't seen that too often. The only time that came up was early on in my when I started here. Having to learn the decision making structure and how we do collaborative decision making and audit and change management and things like that. At a network level versus a school level. Um, that was the only flag there, was that I wasn't doing it according to the decision making structure. We follow RAPID, RAPID, which I forgot, was it recommend, agree, perform, input, and the final decision making. So I wasn't following that. That's our decision making model, our structure that we use. So I wasn't following it. I was going straight to D. I was skipping everybody, like, this is what we need to do. It was like, it's not that we're saying don't do that. They said I haven't agreed to that because what you're asking for requires me to do this. I was like, oh, is that what that is? So it was that. As a principal and as an assistant principal, and even as a teacher, um, I remember as a teacher, I didn't get a whole lot back, but I remember some of the pushback I got was that my class was like super loud. Like it was loud. Like I walk in, I'm cracking jokes. We talking about the Simpsons. We talking about football. Just loud. And I remember both my evaluator and my principal coming to visit, and I learned the term organized chaos. I never heard that term before. And they said the problem with your room is not that it's loud, you have organized chaos. When we come in, the kids are loud, the kids are all over the place, but they're learning.
Mm-hmm.
And see, I didn't know that that's what cultural relevance and cultural responsiveness is. I never knew that's what that was. Kids got to talk. Let the kids talk. If they talk, they won't talk about other stuff. So you're going to get in small groups and you're going to talk about this and y'all going to have a conversation about that. And you're going to compare Bill Clinton to Julius Caesar. You're going to compare Bubba Sparks, his first lines, I didn't choose to rhyme, rhyming chose me, I'm about to detract like a nosebleed. You're going to compare that to Eminem's verse, I was cursed with this curse to just curse. And y'all are going to have a conversation and debate on what figurative language and what wordplay is being used. And the pushback I got was, one, I was using rappers. Students were
And you knew the raps.
I knew the raps. Students were using Tupac's poetry book, and I had a parent very upset that her child was reading a poetry book by Tupac, so I had to show it to her, The Rose at Griffen Concrete. That's the name of that book. And I'm like, there's no profanity in here. These are poems he wrote before he became a rapper while he was in school. And then I got the approval. So I got pushed back like that. As an assistant principal, there was always the fear that if I talked about cultural responsiveness and cultural relevance, that our white staff members would not accept it. So what I learned to do was to do the trainings without using the actual concepts. And that trained me for now. When you're presenting to teachers, don't get up there and do a whole bunch of research quotes. Teachers don't want to hear a whole bunch of research quotes. You can give them one quote and say, this is from this study, and go do what you need to do. That's what I learned. Like, do not get up and give teachers a whole bunch of research quotes and a training and a professional development. If you're a consultant, I don't know what role you are. Do not give teachers that. Teachers want to know what this looks like in the classroom and how they can implement this tomorrow. They don't need to know the body of research. They don't need a lit review. You can tell them that. You can give them the resources at the end. So I learned, don't get up there and say, according to Dr. Gloria Lesson Blenders, according to Dr. Geneva Gay, according to Chance Lewis, according to Dr. I didn't do that. I would give them a quote. I would give them the author and the page number, my citations, and then I go into the skill. That's all I did, but I never told them it was cultural responsiveness and relevance. And then what I saw in the middle school, I was as assistant principal, people started using it. Fights went down. Discipline went down. And people are looking around, they're like, oh, wow, things are so much, wow, we're really doing it. I'm like, yeah, that's because if you let kids talk in the classroom, you won't have to send them to the office. Because I asked them, why are you sending kids to the office for talking when we're working on multiple response strategies? You're going to send them to the office for talking, but you want them to talk. That's not a line. They said, well, we only want them to talk during this time. That's not a line. So when you started training people on communication styles and movement styles and verb from Boykins, people started realizing, oh, they're not misbehaving. This is just their cultural norms. And then as a principal, same thing. Except as a principal was interested is the teachers actually said, we need you to use your research. So I was able to share the research with them. But whenever I did some of the stuff and I presented to people, sometimes I kept the concepts out, but I did the actual work, the actual practices. So that's how I either avoided pushback or how I navigated pushback. Because every now and then, even as a principal, I would get pushback that my focuses wasn't on academics. It was more around culture, which was true. But there's always a method to my madness. Like if you can get this part, then the rest of it will take care of itself. Absolutely. So that was some of the balanced pushback I got.
Absolutely. I remember I used to tell some of my leaders when I used to get called into the office about conversations that I would have with my student athletes, my girls, and I would go in there and I had this. It was some. I had some assistant coaches. They were both white, and so they had wrote anonymous letters to everybody, UIL and all kind of stuff about the conversations I would have to the girls, which weren't inappropriate, but they were about, life and what it
Yeah.
is to be a woman and, choices. And so I stuck to my truth. I was so happy, proud of myself because I was a young first head coach. And in that office with all of them. I mean, I was the only one that looked like me, in there. And I
Yep.
said, if I can teach them about life, I can coach them anything. And so they never gave me problems because I was always winning. So they were like, well, damn, is she doing a lot of talking? But she constantly going to state and championships and coach of the year and all these things. But for me, the most important thing was I need to understand them as individuals. I need them to know who we are and speak their truth. But people would say, oh, well, that's inappropriate. You shouldn't talk about choices and this, and you should be coaching track. But like you saying, the pushback comes from the lack of understanding. And so you
Yes.
give them that's a perfect opportunity for us to say, well, have you ever opened up this book and read? Did you know that there's no cuss words in here? Oh, okay. So the lack of the pushback is from the lack of understanding. It's ignorance, And so
I
it's
would
our
say I would push back on that. It's not a lack of understanding, it's a lack of knowledge.
lack of knowledge. Yeah.
It's a lack of
Absolutely.
knowledge. And the only reason why I say I would push back, that's just a term we use in my network whenever
Yeah.
we want to challenge us. We just say pushback. And I say that because I'm trying to get as many people as possible to stop saying understand. Like
Understand.
when
Yeah.
people say, oh, when people say I don't understand, okay, you don't have to
Right.
understand.
Right.
This is what this is. Why don't you say the truth? It's not that you don't understand.
Right.
Sometimes you say, instead of saying I don't understand, say I don't want to acknowledge that. I don't
Right.
value that. I don't
Right.
see that. I can't
Right.
accept that. Or if
Right.
we're working a math
Or
problem,
I'm not aware of it.
you may say, I don't
Mhm.
understand. But when you're working a math problem, like I have my boys try to say, Dad, um, this is confusing to me.
Mm.
Now I don't understand. And I say, what is confusing? Step two is confusing. What is confusing? Instead of saying, I don't understand step two, that's
Right.
not measurable. So I'm
Right.
trying to get people, and I'm trying to practice it myself. I try not to say understand. Say what
Right.
it really is. Like,
Right.
help me understand why you're that. No, you don't want to understand why I'm doing that. I
Right.
don't. You want me to persuade you.
Mhm.
Help persuade me to say no. Tell the truth.
Mhm.
I don't understand why. I don't understand why there's black on black crime. That's not true. You don't want to accept the
Accept.
reason
Yeah.
for black on black crime. Tell the truth.
Absolutely.
Tell the truth.
Absolutely.
You don't want to accept it. You don't want to address the reason. Because if it's a
Mhm.
problem, you would put resources and programs into place to address it. See, we're all American until we talk about black on black crime. Because if we're
Absolutely.
all American, then we do what's necessary to address quote quote black on black crime. Because this white on
Mhm.
white crime, this Hispanic on Hispanic crime is everywhere.
It's
And I know
everywhere.
we kind of went off into a tangent. I know I did, but think about that. Instead
And it's
of
true.
understand, say the verb is actually there. I don't acknowledge, I don't value, I don't
Mhm.
see, I don't accept, I don't appreciate why we're
Right.
doing this. Tell the truth. Shame the
And
devil.
that's when you have like when people say that, especially when it comes to parents, they'll say, well, in the black community, the parents, they don't care. And it's like, well, maybe
Prove
they
it.
don't know, maybe they
No,
don't
prove
know
it.
that there's SAT prep. Maybe they don't know that there's, you know, so it's not that they don't care,
That's
they
why I
don't
tell
know.
people,
But that's the
I
easy
tell
way
people,
out.
prove it. Prove it. Like when people want to cite data about black fathers, I always say prove it. Well, according to Dr. Ivory Tosin, and other well-known quantitative and qualitative researchers who've actually worked for presidents and think tanks, black men are actually the most involved in their children's lives. We're the most involved, followed by, I believe, Hispanic men. So according to what study? According to what? And matter of fact, I tell people all the time, when I look around the 100 black men I know, 99, 100 black men that I would just point, I would say 99 out of 100 are involved in their church's lives. Only one is not, and that's a family member. But all the rest, every black man that I associate with, everyone, and somebody would say, well, that's your circle. But you said black man. You didn't say some. You said black man. So when you say black men, that includes me with my two black boys that live in my house that I drop off at school. You didn't say some. You said all black men don't take care of their kids. But all the black men I know take care of their kids and they're in the house with their kids. What are you talking about? Let's be specific.
That's real. And a lot of people just want to run from the truth to stay comfortable, to stay comfortable and their
That's it.
perspective of the truth. So I absolutely love that. I look at the notion of bringing those students together to, constructively critique one another and actually disagree to, agree to disagree, so on and so forth. And, there's a story that I could tell to kind of align something in my experience with that. But it's something we need to implement throughout life, like not just as students. Once we become adults, there's things that we have to improve in our communication, and just throwing our hands down. You know what? I give up. Like, I just don't understand. Let's talk about it. What don't you accept about me? So I love that you brought that up. I love that you brought that up because it can be used in so many different perspectives. Now we could talk, like we could keep this going for hours because I'm absolutely loving it. And we're going to have to do an encore. But tell us a little bit about your books. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you may have going on, some upcoming events, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So last year, October 2020, my first edited book came out, which was called Challenges to Integrating Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Programs and Organizations. And that's a book where I purposely sought out not only professors and researchers, but practitioners in P12 practitioners, principals, superintendents, teachers, special education coordinators, consultants, to actually submit to a book talking about how they overcame those challenges and what it does in organizations. So that book actually has some international authors, people in education, outside of education. So it's a book for everybody. If you're looking at seeing how you can implement diversity, equity, inclusion programs, what are some of the pitfalls, how to develop a DEI officer such as myself, those are in there. So it's for everyone. Even though I'm in education, it's for everyone. Right after that, my wife and I had our first publication, and that is the 90-Day Prosperity Journal for busy people. If you're busy and you want to really do some self-awareness, it's 4 sections. One of them is literally listing your wins every single day. Because if we don't list our wins, we see everything wrong throughout the day. So when we get home, we say this was a horrible day when it was only one event that made a horrible day. Everything else went right. But if we're not writing down our wins, and if we're not writing letters to ourselves, if we're not keeping a to-do list of things like that, we start to lose our balance. So that's a journal me and my wife came out with. And what's coming up now, super excited. Because of COVID, I got 2 books coming out pretty much at the same time. I was hoping one book would get out before the other. So I have a book that's coming out with my colleague, Dr. Isaac Carrier. We both were principals. We were both assistant principals in Aldine ISD. He was a principal, and then we both started our doctoral cohort at Texas A&M. But we partnered up and co-edited a book called Fighting the Good Fight: National Narratives of the African American Principalship Experience. And that right there is a 35-chapter book of assistant principals and principals telling their story from their perspective, not from research analysis, literally telling the story of what it's like for them to be a Black administrator, a Black assistant principal, or a Black principal. So we did that intentionally because we usually read studies, and the studies, form our themes and all this. No, we did no research. It's like, tell your story and we're going to put it out there. And that's what we did. My next book, along with that, is my own edited book called Race Mentoring and P12 Educators, Practitioners Contributing to Scholarship. RACE stands for Research, Advocacy, Collaboration, and Empowerment. That book in its entirety, it's P12 practitioners either individually or in partnership with researchers and consultants, actually publishing research that they themselves have done. Because people think research only occurs in higher ed. P12 practitioners like myself, we can write and research too. So this whole book is all about how practitioners using their own research to transform their school and organizational settings. So those two books are coming out pretty soon. I didn't get to send them to you. Doc, I think I sent you one of them. I don't think I sent you the other one.
Yeah, I have
Um,
one of them.
yeah, we're voting on the cover right now for the Fighting the Good Fight. So you can visit me at www.draaronjgriffin.com. I'm on Twitter under the same handle. I am on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, Aaron J. Griffin, PhD. I do consulting work with organizations. So if you want to connect with me and do some work, love to partner up.
Absolutely. We're just, I mean, oh wow, we're just so
Yeah.
excited about, when it's like when we first started the Black podcast, it was just a conversation. I just called him up one day and I was like, we need to do a podcast. And um, it was just a perfect opportunity to get people like yourself in front of the audience and speak the truth because we have to know. And this is how we educate our community
Yeah,
on what's going on in our education system and how we can make it better, how we can contribute, how we can make a change. And so I just truly appreciate you living your truth because you are living it very well. And we're just
thank
so
you.
excited to connect and be connected with you. We're all cousins. So welcome to the family. And so we're going to make sure that we continue to keep this thing going because as we talked about before, it takes a village. And so it takes you being an expert in your space and my space and his space and our space that we can create something that's to the masses that's going to be productive and help our community to continue to press and move forward. And so I thank you for being a part of that and leading the way for many educators. We need leaders like you that speak the truth. So we are just thank you again for accepting the invite and being on the Black
Thank you.
Podcast. We're going to put you in the backstage really quickly while we close out, and then we'll be on our way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know,
Well, we don't have to say anything about him. He just was just, we could just drop the mic after that. But I mean, it is very gives me hope and comfort to know that we do have leaders in this space that are speaking the truth. And so it takes more of us to continue to speak that truth and continue to press forward, even when those challenges. But as he was able to get into a position speaking his truth, so it just shows that we don't have to dumb down our credentials or we don't have to hide behind a certain thing in order to get these jobs. People are going to hire you based on your truth. And so it's been an honor to really know and connect with him because he is doing some great things.
oh yeah, and ultimately, it's something I speak on a lot in my training and my coaching is you have to be you. You have to be you. You have to bring who you are because there's only a certain amount of time that you can put on a facade. Eventually, you're going to crack. And when you crack, you're going to be exposed. So the people who thought they knew who you were no longer care about you because you were a phony. The people who you could have been
Phony
really,
baloney.
the people who you could have really been impactful with, they're not sure about you. Okay, so you are about this life, but why you
Mm,
been faking so long? So they don't want
right.
anything to do with you. So just be you. And
Just be
those who
you.
are meant to benefit from you will come in
Will.
alignment with you. And
Absolutely.
we see, that's exactly what happened with Dr. Griffin. So
So please make sure
absolutely
you
love
go
it.
and check him out and check out his website and purchase his books. And like again, we know that we all know an educator or someone that's working in that space. And like he said, it's not just for educators, but diversity in the workplace, corporate America, everywhere we go is relevant. So please make sure you're going to the website and purchasing those books and support Dr. Griffin and continue to help him press forward so that he can continue to impact our community and make a difference. So you will find us here on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Central Time, the Black Podcast. Please make sure you share this content. Do not forget, it is important that you do your part and share these videos because if you're not sharing and you're only keeping this knowledge to yourself, And we know knowledge is power. If you don't spread it to other people and your circle of your circle of people don't get influenced, and then now we can't make an impact. So please make sure you're doing your part and sharing these videos of our special guests that we had this week and every week here on the Black Podcast on Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Time. Be safe. We love you, and we will see you very soon.
All right, guys. See you on the flip. Y'all take care.